Now I'm going to show you how to set up the database for using these examples and in general. If you're using WAMP server, it's going to make things a lot easier because everything's going to be installed for you. Otherwise, you have to download the PHP administrative screens here for PHP MyAdmin. It's open source, easy to install, and you can just use the README to get it going. Here we are in PHP MyAdmin from the local host, which is important. That's local to this machine. We couldn't access this from another IP address or something like that based on what we're going to set things to here. That's pretty secure. You don't want your root to be your root user account, the admin account, to be accessible from anybody that might stumble on your Apache server via the internet, because if you're on the internet, then that can actually be visible if you don't have your firewall preventing it. PHP MyAdmin is the nested folder structure, and this is the main admin page. We'll be setting some privileges. You'll notice here that the configuration warning is coming up down here at the bottom. The root admin account doesn't have a password, and that's not terribly secure, so you can read this, but it is basically telling us to change that root password. If we also take a peek at the connecting to the data example here, we see the warning is coming up that user 1 doesn't exist at localhost. Localhost is how this is set up. This is specifically only usable from the localhost machine, and the IP address doesn't matter here in this case because the localhost is how it's going to connect. User 1 is an account that we're going to create right now. So we'll get rid of this and that other configuration error before moving forward. So we click Privileges. You'll see a couple of accounts here. We're going to delete this any account here. We don't need that one. And the root account, we're going to set a password. Before we do that, because that's going to cause a couple of issues, we're going to add that user 1 by clicking the Add a New User button right here. We'll put in that user 1. We won't select any host. We'll select local host. If we select any host, you may notice that %, and that's what it means. Any host not specifically limited to the local host, so other IP addresses could access this account, if they have access to the server, that is. But we will select localhost. This is so we can prevent certain intrusions into our database. And we'll just select the basics here. We'll explain this in a little bit, but if you want to select data, actually view the data, grab it from the database, or insert, update, or delete data, rows, columns, different bits of information, then you need to select all 4. We need all 4 selectable here. You could set things up in a different way. That's for another time, of course. So we'll hit go, but first we'll set that password. Testing. Or whatever you want it to be, as long as you match everything moving forward. And we'll hit go. You can see the SQL is displayed here, and you can see it's going to be user 1 at localhost. So that is going to look exactly like the example that we have in our other browser window. We can click the home again and just see that we still have this error to deal with, this warning. We'll go back here, right click, refresh. There we are, connecting successfully. So 1 out of 2 things done. We'll go back here and go into privileges. And now we see that we have the root. We need to change the password. So when we do this, it's important to know that you're going to have to set up some configurations afterwards, because PHP MyAdmin knows that this is set up a particular way in the beginning, and it's going to not have access to the database after we change this. So you're going to get an access denied error here, but we will change that. Notice all the other privileges here for that root account. You can uncheck the ones that you know that you don't necessarily want for that root account, but the root account is going to really have access to everything, so I wouldn't touch that. Down at the bottom, we'll give it a password. Whatever that password is going to be, you're going to need that password later in a couple of minutes as we move forward in order to make the configuration for PHP MyAdmin work correctly. And then you can see we have other details here at the bottom, and we're going to hit the go button here. It makes that change. That's the actual SQL. Click home again. Just like I said, access is denied for root at localhost. Now we're going to move forward into the configuration file, and this is what you need to set up in order to get rid of this error. So this is a little bit of a showstopper at the moment, but not to worry. this is the only point that I would say if you are new to lots of these concepts and you're having problems, go into WAMP server and actually uninstall the whole thing. Just uninstall it off of the computer. You might want to save your Apache conf config folder. That's something you might want to do, but you can easily set that up again if you're just setting up a virtual host. I don't recommend doing that if you have other databases on your machine, of course. That's just if you're new, you're a beginner, you're having problems, and this error has really caused you problems, you forgot the password or something. Moving forward, we'll get rid of this particular error. But this is the point where you could uninstall the WAMP server if you worked with the WAMP server, and that's going to uninstall everything off, and then you could reinstall it. Or you could just follow the instructions that I give you moving forward, and everything should run smoothly for you. If we look at the www directory, and I have it open here already, you can see that within your PHP 5 folder, it could be PHP or just PHP 5, this is not necessarily where you're going to find things. You might think that's where you're going to find your files. It's attached with your web server, but that's going to be located within www here. It may be a different folder for you, depending on how you install things. But within that, you're going to place your PHP MyAdmin folder, and then you can run setup information for how this is going to work. We're going to set up the configuration file as well. I'll show you how to do that. And this is going to rely on looking in here, and you can see that there is a setup file that you can work with. And I might have already edited it, but at the same time, I think it's going to be somewhere else if we can just sort it. I thought it would be in order there. But what we can do is we can actually just open this up. It's a very simple file to work with, config inc.php. This is another standard way to name your include files, but I wouldn't recommend using inc. Just keep it at PHP. We'll drag it in here, and what we'll do is, first thing we're going to look for is password in quotes, and we'll do a search on the source code here. Search as you need to. You'll see that we have passwords that are blank here. This is on a default configuration. So now I'm going to show you what happens if you uninstall WAMP server and then you want to reinstall it again. You might still have databases there. Those databases are still going to be in place. They're not going to necessarily be removed. So you just have to do a couple of things here to make sure it's going to work for you. Now what I can do is I can go back in, hold this down. You have to actually hold it down or it pops up. We'll go into PHP MyAdmin and you might get this. You might get the access denied for root at localhost. Well, I set things up to a special password, and I called it test or testing, depends on what you want to set up. And then when you reinstall it, it actually is going to disappear. So we'll place in testing. And each time that we see a password pop up, there's a whole bunch of configurations that we have to take into consideration. But it's in multiple locations and you just have to use it and change it. This is a special SQL validator. You don't have to change that one. There's different ways to deal with that. You just go through and see if any of these array configurations need to be set from the empty string. Because when you first install the MySQL, it's going to have root admin level access to the database that doesn't necessarily use a password. So it's not necessarily what you want to do. So that should be fine. So the configuration file is red, and you can see that we're still working on it. Access denied for user again. We say, okay, well, that's not the password. So we'll try the other password that we have there. And you just go through it again. I just want to show you that if you forget the password, you can just go through a couple of times and just reset it. There's easier ways to do that. So it's either test or testing. And all you have to do is go through and make sure that your password is changed, and you can loop through that, or you should be able, depending on your editor, to loop through that as many times as you need to. Save that out. And that was it. So it might not get there the first time, so you don't panic. There are ways to get out of that as well, to reset the MySQL databases. You should really keep up on it and get a little bit more into the administrative work for MySQL. It'll help you out. Okay, so privileges is the first thing we want to actually take a look at. Now, you're going to see a bunch of things in there. There are different level access ways of getting in here to your databases. Now, you definitely don't necessarily want something to have a no password here. So you're going to have to research the different users that you have here within your your database to definitely take out some users that aren't necessarily needed. You may have your root passwords set to no password and not set at all. So what you do is you can actually select something, and then you can actually make a change to it. You can delete users that you don't want here as well. Delete the users and then reload the privileges afterwards. But you can also edit things. You don't have to select something to edit. That's only if you want to use this information down here. Now, we'll edit the root because these do have passwords. I did set them. You want to change both of them. There's different meanings for this, but it gets a little bit complicated to explain in a short period of time. The admin has everything selected here as far as the rights, and we're just going down here to change the password. So instead of no password, you're going to put in a password and then retype the password and then hit go. That'll reset things for you. So what you want to do is do that for both root, and then you're going to have to go through because you're going to get an access denied immediately. And then you're going to have to go through and change that password to whatever it is. If you're following along right now, you already changed the password to test or testing. So use the same password for your root for both of these and make sure you have that yes when it goes through the second time, and make sure all privileges are set for root. I also have a user 1 here that I added, so you can actually add that yourself. I'll edit. I just have select, insert, update, delete used for this particular data. You can have files selected as well, but you're going to have to look at the differences between the different things here. Select is the basic query. We're going to see that. That's how you select data from your table or tables and other ways of getting data out of the database. Insert will insert a row or rows into the database. We can update a row or rows and then delete row or rows. And that's going to be really the majority of what we're going to be doing while we work through the database examples. You really need to get familiar with the syntax. You can get to the SQL help from here. You can add queries as well and look at different documentation. MySQL.com also has a lot of great information. And then you can actually see all the SQL queries that are going to be displayed for you throughout the interface here. It's really great to work with this. Just get it to the point that you understand a little bit about the PHP My Admin screens. It's going to be very, very helpful for you. And what we can do is, since this is already added, this user is okay, we can actually just go back to privileges, and that's going to show us that we have an update there. You're going to need to add a new user. In this case, we'll call it user 2, but you're going to need user 1 to use the database examples, the one I have already. And then you just select what you want. You don't want to give the ability to create or alter tables. This is more admin type work, and this is definitely admin type work. So you don't want to have this user having all of this power there. You just want to give this user the ability to do some things here, but not too much. You get the idea. And there are other ways you can set up one user to just select, and then other users can have insert, update, and delete rights. Or maybe nobody has delete rights. It's up to how you set up your database. Note that this is going to pop up if you didn't type in the passwords here. And we'll just make it testing. Testing is our password for the user. Test is what I set up for the root. But the root is up to you. And then we can see the privileges here. And it adds the user there. It's not just limited to localhost. It has the % there. You could limit it to the localhost and not allow it to be accessed from other machines and things like that. That's up to you. This user 1 I had for localhost. We also have to create the database. Now, I have a database here already, and if you practice and you're following along, you might do something similar. You might want to rename the database, change things. You can drop the database, and that gets rid of it. But we'll just rename it to samples old 2. That way we can recreate our samples. This is what you're going to need to bring the data in. So now we no longer have a samples database. We can go to the SQL query, and we can put in a query. We'll find in our Learning PHP folder, you can have a local SQL. I have it here in the root, but I also have it here in the database section. You can load that in, bring it into Dreamweaver, and take a peek at it. We'll close this here, and you can see that this is going to insert some information here. So we're going to create a table. This is a difficult structure to just explain in a short period of time. There definitely needs to be more MySQL information to get a lot of detail in the database section. This is really an overview of getting this started, but there are many different ways to get advanced knowledge of PHP and MySQL together. We're definitely going to cover quite a lot, but in the concern that we're going to need to cover some of the other information here, you can run this script as is. You can just copy it, bring it back to this little query window, paste it in there as is, and then you can actually just hit go to execute that, and it should work for you right out of the box. We're brought back here, and you can see that it was successful. All of this is gone through, and you can just take a peek at how this is formatted, and the database should be in place. It actually creates the database, and you can see that's what it does. So now we're all set. We can use our samples and not have any problems. You can retrieve data, and everything should be in place. This is an error screen, so don't think that that's an error. That was by design. And we'll take a look at some other software that you can use with the MySQL information. I think it's a really nice thing to be able to use PHPMyAdmin, and I think it's something that you can definitely get your hands on and really get into it. So you're going to understand it if you play around with it. It really lets you do a lot of wonderful things, especially see the SQL, and you can go through and see the different structure here that you're going to be dealing with things. And it's going to be really powerful. You can mess things up a little bit too, but if you follow the directions here, you can see that I can rename databases and create a new one with ease just from that script, and you shouldn't have any problems with that. But dive into it. Just make sure that you're aware that you need to back up things here and there, and you don't want to overwrite anything, especially the project files.